I'd like to welcome everybody to, I believe this is the sixth one of our webinar series. I'm Carol Downey with River Action, and we've been able to do so with very generous help from a few of our sponsors, including Ashton Engineering, the City of Moline, the Mark Schwiebert Fund for Environmental Studies, and Big River Magazine, and the Nature Conservancy. So we certainly appreciate their support and their help in getting us, or enabling us to do at least have a webinar series, since we're not able to do our live conference. So thank you all for attending. And today we're going to hear about an urban river, the rediscovery and healing of an urban river, in particular the Kinnickinnic River in Milwaukee. I am going to turn over the introductions to Ed Freer. Ed is with GRAEF, also GRAEF-USA, and he is one of our Upper Mississippi River Conference committee members, and he's been very helpful to help getting us some things set up and finding speakers, and this one in particular. So Ed, I'm going to turn it over to you.
And okay. So I'm honored to be here, and I was able to entice a couple of friends who have worked on this outstanding project. It's the rediscovery and the healing of a river that has
Something else.
Okay, I'm going to talk. I may sound like I'm repeating myself. I'm introducing Patrick Elliott with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, also known as MMSD. Patrick is not a stranger to Iowa. He got his undergraduate degree at the University of Iowa in geography. So I'm just gonna, I keep getting talked over here in my audio. So it's Patrick is an engineer with MMSD. He's worked on this fabulous project, the restoration of the Kinnickinnic River. It's updating of a floodplain. It's improving public safety, naturalizing 7 miles of stream bed. And he will, it's a major project of over $350 million. Tanya is a planner who's got undergraduate degrees in architecture and a master's in urban planning from Columbia University. And she was a major teammate on this project as well, engaging the public and making sure that there's a lot of input and trying to balance resiliency from an economic, a social, and environmental. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick.
All right, thanks, Ed. Just need a confirmation. Can everybody hear me okay?
You sound good.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Thank you to Ed. Thank you to Carol, and thank you to River Action for the opportunity to speak to you today. Tanya, if you could go ahead and click through if you have control of this presentation. So thanks. Greetings from Milwaukee. We just wanted to kind of give you a quick highlight of some of the things that we really enjoy in Milwaukee, and including the old German beverage here, and as well as custard. I don't know where custard is based out of, but it's really good. And Summerfest, obviously that photo of the largest rock and roll festival, outdoor rock and roll festival, was not this year, but is something we really enjoy up here in the Milwaukee area, as well as, next slide, some of our characters as well. We have the Bernie Brewer and Bango with the Milwaukee Bucks, and of course there's the Fonz, and Fonz is decked out appropriately this year. Next slide. But of course, Milwaukee is built on water. It's built on Lake Michigan. We all recognize that in Milwaukee is that this is an important resource to us, Lake Michigan, not only where we recreate, but where also we get our drinking water. And I included that top picture there. As Ed said, I am from the Iowa area. I'm from Mount Vernon, Iowa, and near Cedar Rapids, and really enjoyed the presentation a few weeks ago from that on that project. But being in Iowa, I did not realize that Milwaukee had their own special lingo for drinking fountains, which they call bubblers. I thought that was one of the most ridiculous things that I'd ever heard. But now being up here for 20 years, I've incorporated that in my vocabulary. So we have a lot of fun up here in Milwaukee, and especially with our language. Next slide. And so as Ed said, I work at the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, and we are a regional agency that our main objective is the cleaning of the waterways here, cleaning of the water as it's returned to the waterways. Next slide. We have 2 wastewater treatment plants. So we treat the wastewater from the metropolitan area. And where I work at MMSD, I work primarily in the section where we construct flood risk reduction projects, as we like to call them. We're reducing flood risk with these projects, and so trying to manage the flooding that occurs here. Next slide. The customers that we serve, over 1 million in city of Milwaukee, as well as the surrounding community, 28 municipalities in total, and our planning area is about 500 square miles. And that includes 6 different watersheds. All of those, yeah, go ahead and to the next slide, that are not tributary to the Mississippi. So we are just a bit outside of this Mississippi River water basin. As you can see on the slide to the left on the screen, that if you go about 20-30 miles to the west of us, you will actually get into the Mississippi River, get into the Waukesha area, and our flow still starts to go down into the Fox and into the Rock River, out towards the Mississippi. But all of our water right here in Milwaukee drains directly into the Lake Michigan, into the Great Lakes basins. Go ahead and skip to the next slide. And this is primarily through 3 main waterways that come through the downtown Milwaukee. Again, this is the primary reason that Milwaukee is here, why the Native Americans settled in this area, and why the European settlers came in and called this home as well. From the north, you have the largest river, the Milwaukee River, that comes through and goes through the downtown. Out to the west, we have the Menominee River, and that flows in through the valley. It will actually hug around Miller Park if you've ever driven by the area here. And the one that we're going to focus on is the Kinnickinnic River, and that is a smaller river that's right on the south side, entirely within Milwaukee County. So it's a relatively small watershed. Next slide. And it is the most urbanized watershed. So this is the Kinnickinnic River watershed. This is on the city south side. The top of the slide is the downtown area. It extends all the way down to the General Mitchell International Airport. It's only about 27 square miles, so it's it's relatively small, but it's also very urbanized. It's the most urbanized stream in the state of Wisconsin. almost half of the surfaces within the watershed are impervious surfaces, which means you have the parking lots, the rooftops, the sidewalks, the streets, all those hard surfaces that don't allow water to soak into the ground. And what this all translates into is the rain running straight off of those surfaces and overwhelming our rivers and streams, and which has led to a high flood risk throughout the waterways, throughout this watershed. And we have remaining, we've been working on this, but we still have over 660 structures, residential, commercial, industrial structures that are located within this 100-year floodplain, within this high-risk floodplain. In addition to this high flood risk, in the next slide, we have miles and miles of concrete lined stream. So we have over 7 miles of this concrete line that's throughout the watershed, throughout the Kinnickinnic River and its tributaries. And lots of people ask me, why do you have these open sewer drainage ditch that run through your communities here? Go to the next slide. You know, how did you get to the point where you had these streams that were designed with the CCC and the WPA, you know, still putting in some armoring, but having still a natural stream design, and then converted it to, next slide, this, which is, this was the approach back in the day, and this was what was used by flood managers back in the day. Next slide. It was all to address this historic flooding that was on the Kinnickinnic River, where you had this development that occurred within the watershed, kept spreading out until it essentially was fully developed, and you had all these impervious surfaces, all led to significant downstream flooding in these areas. So this is the old Polish neighborhood at the downstream end of at the bottom of the funnel on the Kinnickinnic River. And the way that they addressed that, next slide, was to take these vegetated streams that were filled with all sorts of roughness and curvature, and they would straighten them out and line them with concrete. Next slide. So they would take this and they would smooth out these channels, and you know, really, this is the sewer engineer's design back in the day. This was common back in the day, is trying to push the water, move the water as quickly through these areas as possible. And you know, this is also, I guess, it's good to keep in mind that this is also the time of the freeways, when the freeways were built, and this is all the same mindset, the same approach, was to just try and move these things through these areas as quickly as possible, just focusing on that single objective. And they did this on the next slide, throughout the watershed, even through all of their park areas that are up and down the Kinnickinnic River and our other waterways. And so in this slide right here, this is Jackson Park, an aerial view of Jackson Park, and it's really tough to see which is the river and which is the stream, which is never a good sign. And you can see, I don't know if Tanya can move that cursor, kind of highlighting where that concrete line channel is, but it's essentially the lighter color channel, or lighter color concrete within that area. Next slide. And they saw this as a big improvement. This was a major hurdle, and it probably solved some issues back in the day. But and they all saw this as you know, moving things forward, and so they had big celebrations to celebrate all of this improvement throughout the area. Next slide. But we're left with this legacy. And we are now 50, 60 years after it's all been installed. We're seeing all sorts of problems from this. You know, what the whole intent of building these concrete line channels is to move water as fast as possible. And this water and these rivers and concrete line channels are put throughout the watershed, right through residential areas, right in behind people's backyards. So right in through these neighborhoods where kids play and people come to see what's going on at this river. And so right where this father is taking his two little girls down to check out the stream, this is what it looks like on a flooding day. And so you have the river that will fly through this area. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do and moving water up to 20 feet per second through this area. And as a result, we've had several deaths over the years because of when people slip into this area, they're not getting out. So next slide. So we had this severe public hazard that's running right through these neighborhoods. We have, you know, the obvious one is that it's not a stream anymore. It's not a river. It's a concrete ditch. So you have issues with removing all of the benefits, all the habitat and the issues that you create with the water quality. In addition, as shown in that lower picture, it's falling apart. It's a tough place to be for a concrete channel. You have that constant freeze thaw on these hard floodplain areas, and so it's all starting to break up in these sections. It's over 60 years old in many areas. Next slide. And at the end of the day, it's not meeting its objective. So all this concrete lining was this map incorporates the modeling and shows and reflects all that concrete lining. So this map is one of the current maps that's shown using the updated rainfall data, updated flow data from USGS and others, and calculated by our regional planning agency, and showing that the concrete does not convey these flows through these areas anymore. They're now spilling out into these neighborhoods during these high flood events. So we are moving forward, taking this issue of having to address the flood risk and also all of this legacy concrete. And MMSD, working with several area partners, tackled this watershed planning effort then back a few years back, and trying to look at this holistically rather than just looking at that sole objective of trying to push water through these areas as quickly as possible. We're trying to not only reduce the flood risk, but also to slow down these flows within these areas, to improve the riparian and aquatic habitat, restore some natural function back to these stream corridors, make them look like streams again, so that you can point to these and the public will understand the connection between these streams and the natural habitat, and understand that these convey directly to Lake Michigan, and understand that they should do things to try and improve the conditions around these stream areas. But then also, as we're constructing these projects, we knew that these were going to be hundreds of millions of dollars. We want to make sure that we are building something that the public is going to embrace, that these communities are going to not only embrace, but to take ownership of. And so that at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're building things that not only engage the public, but then also if we can, we will incorporate enhancements that will benefit others. We will work with other partners to be able to build things outside of our project. But we definitely don't want to put barricades in. We don't want to block different community objectives or things that the community wants to do. So we work, as Tanya is going to talk about in a little bit, in working and understanding what's going on in the community, what are the plans within these areas, and how our projects can fit within these plans. Next slide. So we tackled this watershed planning, and we did it using the standard toolkit that all flood managers, everybody here is probably well aware of. And we tried to break it down into some more common language for the public. And so we used these terms like push it and slow it and block it. And instead of talking about increasing conveyance capacity, trying to simplify the message a little bit. But really, that's what we're talking about, is trying to increase the opening so that the water does not back up into these neighborhoods. We understood that push it was overused in the past with these concrete lined streams, so we coupled that with slow it down too, by expanding these floodplain corridors. Blocking it, these levees and flood walls, that's, everything you guys are well familiar with in the Mississippi area. Next slide. We also looked at storing the water through not only large scale detention basins, but also looked at, because we are working within a small flashy watershed, what are the benefits of green infrastructure within this area? So smaller scale storage opportunities. And then in when we're not able to lower the flood stages enough, when we're not able to bring that flood risk down, we look at working directly on these homes and look at either buying, acquiring, and removing these homes, or floodproofing these homes. And in the Wisconsin area, according to the codes, that generally requires raising those homes and filling around those homes for residential. So it's a significant effort, and one that's probably going to be pretty challenging in these dense urban areas in the Kinnickinnic River. We took all of this work in the toolkit, and we combined them, and just kind of cutting to the chase here quickly, is it developed a series of different recommendations throughout the watershed. And so, just to give a quick overview, all of that yellow is the miles and miles of concrete lining that we need to remove and to restore it with a natural functioning stream. The asterisks are the dots that we have there. Those are bridge and culverts, over 21 bridges and culverts that we have to work with the municipalities to upgrade or replace. We're also looking at those hatched areas, and that is where we're acquiring parcels, either to get the area that we need in order to expand the floodplain corridor, to expand the riparian area that we need to move those flood flows through. Or we have voluntary acquisition and floodproofing that's kind of scattered around, where we need to go in and we're not able to completely reduce the flood risk. So at the end of the day, we'll offer those people voluntary acquisition or floodproofing. And then the last thing is those purple shaded areas. Those are areas working with other partners or acquiring property in order to store the floodwaters. And this is kind of leads us to the key partner that MMSD has in this. The next slide, Tanya, and that is Milwaukee County Parks. This slide right here shows the green is all parkland. So MMSD is one agency, one entity within the Milwaukee County area, and we have a specific set of objectives and things that we can use taxpayer dollars for. Milwaukee County is another entity, another regional government agency here, and they own and manage these park areas. And it just turns out that with the vision and foresight of the people in the past, they bought these areas and converted them into parkland when the city was being developed. And so this we only show the Kinnickinnic River, but all throughout Milwaukee County, there's these rings around the of parkland that are all connected with our riparian corridors, with our rivers and streams. And so within the Kinnickinnic River, we have this close partner, and we knew that this is the partnership that we needed to create between Milwaukee County and MMSD to not only to move our project forward and obtain our objectives, but also to work with this other public entity as that same tax base and to make improvements within those park areas. We have a great park system. It's an award-winning park system, but like many park systems, it's old, and so it needs a shot of funding occasionally. And we saw this as a great opportunity to not only achieve our goals, but to give it that shot of funding, get it that refresh that it truly needs in some of these areas. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tanya, and she's going to talk about not only that partnership that we had with Milwaukee County, but also with other partners within the area.
Great, thanks, Patrick. So yeah, I'm Tanya Fonseca, and like everyone shared, I'm an urban planner. So this was a really fun project, obviously, because there's a lot of moving parts in terms of multidisciplinary work, right? And creating a watershed plan that has a lot of engagement. And as a planner at a multidisciplinary full service engineering firm, you know, it's really rewarding to see these projects be planned and then be implemented ultimately. And so that's a lot of what our focus at GRAEF are these sustainable projects in our region. We're headquartered in Milwaukee, but have a few offices in the region. So I'd say as a planner in general, a strong planning process and really strong community engagement is something that I'm most passionate about, and certainly is something that's integrated into this project. So, you know, I would be a bad planner if I you know, jumped into a project and didn't look at what's already been done. And so the entire team did that. And, you know, reviewed everything that has already taken place by planners, technical memos, of course, other engineers, county parks, of course, community organizations. There's a lot of work that was already done, and certainly all of these have implementation actions. So it was really important for us to be fully versed in what was already being planned for, so that we could help potentially implement that, or certainly not, you know, block any of the planned implementation. And, you know, early on, kind of as Patrick mentioned, Milwaukee County Parks was, you know, a really critical partner for this, because certainly, you know, there's always a limit on money, right? And so the more creative and innovative we can be in leveraging these opportunities and collaborating and talking is really important. So I'd say listening was really critical in this project, and we really did take a lot of time to listen to a lot of partners and stakeholders, including community residents. So in the picture on the left here, you're seeing our former Parks Director speaking with community organizer, a school principal, and some residents. This is my colleague Larry, a designer, you know, really teasing out what was working and not working in this park, including for this adjacent school, which was really important. Here's another example of a similar meeting where, you know, again, these were, you know, kind of where we invited residents and neighborhood organizations and businesses. So there was really a lot of on the ground outreach and mailing and phone calls at this point in time to really share what was happening. This, you know, certainly is a watershed that's seen some really severe flooding, and all the folks in this room were familiar with that and knew about it and had seen it themselves. So having them in the room to talk about what they wanted to see and, you know, their fears, and to better understand this larger planning process was just absolutely critical. Not only so, you know, I'd say generally the planning process went smooth because there was that trust there, but also people felt that they were really part of the process and engaged and provided feedback and would keep coming to meetings throughout the process. In addition to that, we also worked, of course, with a lot of stakeholders in the watershed, including other organizations and agencies and partners. So a watershed advisory committee was established for the watershed far in advance of this specific project, really focusing on anything that's happening with the KK River watershed. And so all of those meetings were absolutely critical as well, because a lot of knowledge there and a lot of, again, projects and implementation happening. So a lot of opportunities for coordination, no doubt. So here's just a quick snapshot. Of course, it's probably not perfectly exhaustive, but of who is at the table at that level, and all of that feedback and involvement from all these layers of community members and stakeholders resulted in a really, I'd say, rewarding process of planning the watershed, using all those tools that Patrick just shared with you to kind of tease out what makes sense and what works. And of course, with all the modeling, figuring out what made sense and what made sense for the parks and the surrounding neighborhoods. This group one probably sticks out a little bit, and that was one specific alternative analysis of green infrastructure only, just to kind of tease out how impactful that would be in the watershed and where it would be impactful most importantly. And as a result, there was a green infrastructure plan created for the watershed that a green infrastructure subcommittee actually worked with us on because, as a whole, the stakeholders felt that, although gray infrastructure is very important, and of course of utmost importance is, naturalizing this river again, but, as Patrick mentioned, it is flashy, and any resiliency that we can fold in certainly is a big opportunity. So kind of swinging back to the community feedback, once we got to that stage, we continually wanted to, transparently communicate with everyone and do so in a really accessible, highly visual way so people could really understand what was happening. The watershed is very diverse as well. So all of these meetings took place in Spanish as well as English. All the materials translated in Spanish, and we, through community partners, also had translators and interpreters at all the meetings. These pictures are examples of some larger scale community open houses that we hosted in community venues and senior centers in the watershed. The photo here in the upper left is an example of how we began those meetings, where we invited everyone as they arrived in groups of 10 to 15 people to sit in on a brief PowerPoint presentation that was really an orientation to kind of just explain the goals of the project, goals of the meeting, of course, and in the watershed and what was happening. And then from there, we would, kind of let people flow into the larger room with the open house, where they could then kind of learn on a level playing field and interact with all of the engineers, the landscape architects, planners, and other professional consultants on the team to provide feedback and learn more. So I'd say what was fantastic about it was these meetings were as meaningful for us as consultants as I think it was for the community. There was a lot of mutual learning there. I mean, I recall even our hydraulic engineer who was really doing all the modeling and figuring out the nitty-gritty and the alternatives, really taking the time to talk to people and listen, which I think was just as a planner, just makes me so happy, because I think that these processes are really important. And, I think a lot of larger scale projects like these, sometimes the public involvement can be seen as overwhelming or challenging because things can be controversial. And I think that this project is really an important example of us taking something that is really controversial and no doubt emotional for the community and making it really exciting and hopeful, certainly. And I think a lot of that is really made possible by the partnership with community organizations. MMSD and other watershed partners have a really strong relationship with a couple of organizations that I think really set the tone for all of this work. One is the 16th Street Community Health Centers, which does focus on the south side of Milwaukee, and they are indeed health centers, but they have a Department of Environmental Health, and they do a lot of community revitalization work, working on capacity building and helping people fix up their homes, but also, of course, focusing on the watershed and the river itself. And another organization that was really instrumental was the KK River Neighbors in Action, which is a resident-led community association in the densest part of the watershed, a lower income area, the area where all those acquisitions that Patrick outlined are taking place. Just an incredibly strong community organization that's really leading a lot of initiatives and is highly involved in this process, just to ensure that, they have a seat at the table too, and they've always been invited. So there's just a lot of really great planning and engagement symbiosis there. And again, Patrick mentioned these earlier with the parks. We have, this really elaborate park system that, envisioned for it, that was planned in the 20s, that we want to keep giving back to. And certainly the KK, unfortunately, has not been as much of an asset to this watershed or the parks in general. And we really want to change that moving forward. And so working with the community, we spent a lot of time listening from the beginning and just looking at aerials and photos and working with the community about what they'd like to see, what they'd like to retain. And of course, getting to a level where we began to be able to put together conceptual plans for that larger vision so that the community continue planning and continue that dialogue moving forward. So these are some examples of what we heard from the community. And of course, first and foremost was make the KK River a community asset. Really, wherever possible, let's naturalize it, daylight it, dechannelize it. And, the community really wanted to see opportunities in the parks, but also elsewhere to embrace the river and really interact with it. Given that we were doing all of this park planning simultaneously, that gave us an opportunity to look in a larger way at the parks too, with the Parks Department about, again, what to retain. So, these old growth trees, of course, were of utmost importance. And then increasing safety, habitat, of course, is really important, but also community gathering spaces, upgrading, older athletic fields even. And then, of course, there is an existing trail system in the watershed that the community is really interested in seeing grow and can do so naturally along the river and throughout the park system. So there was some attention there as well. So there were alternatives for all of the parks, and the community had feedback there too. And of course, Milwaukee County Parks was at the table through and through, because ultimately these parks are their responsibilities, and any feedback about them, some of it was certainly going to be their financial responsibility too. But all of this culminated in these 5 master plans or concept plans. And, of course, all of this work is happening over a large span of time, 25, 30 years or so. So there's different phasing that's taking place. So while some of these parks, say Wilson, for instance, isn't going to be updated anytime soon, it was really critical for us to do in-depth planning now so that we could better understand the storage, what's happening, and what community members want to see, so that as the planning continues to unfold, the community has already been engaged in that envisioning, while others like Pulaski Park, for instance, are happening short term. And what you'll be seeing shortly is it's now been built, which is really exciting and has been really critical in kind of setting the tone for the watershed. So again, that's really kind of that area as well, where the community is incredibly active through this entire process. Again, the densest area of the watershed, the most diverse area of the watershed, and also in terms of environmental health and demographics, is socioeconomically, more disadvantaged than most of the other areas in the watershed. So of course, of utmost importance to ensure that, this community is engaged and gets a park that, you know, is worthy of them, certainly. So for Pulaski, we really did engagement a little differently by that point because it is a smaller scale area, and this is an area that's highly engaged and organized, and they already are regularly meeting for community meetings and having celebrations regularly. This is a community that really cares about one another, knows one another. So 16th Street Community Health Centers and KK River Neighbors in Action would regularly be planning events that we could then, for our engagement, just plug into. You know, it wasn't having to schedule a special meeting. We could kind of just go with what made sense for them, but as well as the project. So this is an example of engagement on a nice day, where we were able to be outside with food and music. And of course, we're able to get feedback from the community about what they wanted. And this is a session pretty far into the process. We already had a pretty good handle of what they wanted, and it was in the plans. This was really for the final design, being able to pick out all of the design details, the playground equipment, the pedestrian bridge. And, you know, working with county parks solidified what things would work or not work for maintenance reasons, but then really had a lot of choices for the community to select those features for their own park. Also, what I thought was really cool are, you know, activities like fishing demonstrations, even though there weren't fish in the KK yet, and they're still figuring things out, right? You know, kids fishing in a concrete channel is a little sad, but just for the kids to be able to understand that and learn about that and understand that someday there will be fish in the KK River again was just really cool and exciting. So again, this is kind of a quick zoom in of Pulaski Park here, the existing conditions before all of the construction, and part of our planning and engagement work was ensuring that we had really great graphics to communicate what was happening and what it would look like. And that also included, you know, interactive activities. So we used virtual reality. So here's a kid here with goggles, and here's a tablet so that people could actually see what it was like to be in the park after the improvements, which I think helped improve feedback. But also because the park, not the entirety of it, but a good heart of it was going to be out of commission for a couple years during construction, it was of utmost importance for people to really see what was coming and to know that even though they were losing their park for a couple years, all of their hard work and feedback and dedication was going to result in this really exciting project. So, you know, we were really passionate about communicating that back to community members too when they came to meetings, so they could understand too why choices were made and that this is what they picked, and how many people voted for what, which I think was really just helpful to kind of set the tone and make sure that this project is really catalytic for all the forthcoming projects in the watershed. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Patrick to kind of share the story of the construction process.
Yeah, I just have a few more slides here to go through, but just going through this is Pulaski Park. This is that broken concrete before we started in April of 2018. And this is after we did the construction here. We removed that concrete, we expanded the floodplain, we were able to put in this new, larger pedestrian bridge to replace the old pedestrian bridge that was also had concrete falling off of it. This again, as Tanya said, the design of that pedestrian bridge, you get to where you have 3 or 4 choices that the county and MMSD and others don't really care, and you just say, well, let the community decide. And so they got to choose that bridge, and you know, that's their bridge, and they'll take care of that bridge now. And it's a great story, and you can definitely feel the appreciation from the community. And hear the appreciation from the community. Here's the concrete from the other side of that bridge, showing that concrete lining, and then removing that. Next slide. that restored channel through this section. Again, this is right after construction, so the vegetation is still getting ready to grow, but putting in that rock line channel and having that vegetated floodplain to allow the floodwaters to expand in this area. Much slower flows pass through here during high flows. We've already had a few high flows pass through, and so they're definitely a lot slower within this section, much safer for active park users that are in this area. Next slide. And so then these are just some more updated. So the other slides were more from last year, and we finished construction this past August, and some of these other areas that we completed a year ago have had a chance to start establishing. The vegetation's had a chance to start establishing, and it's definitely getting more use. The new playgrounds and the new basketball courts that we had to shift outside of the alignment of the river are definitely active. Next slide. And you see that the community use in this area, there's lots of smiles, and that is one of the most rewarding things. I don't live that far away from here, and so I'm able to come here pretty regularly and kind of check on things and make sure that things are shaping up and you know, everything's holding up the way it's supposed to. And it's great to see the smiles on people's faces and to see how much they enjoy this park space and enjoy not only the active spaces, but also be able to get down to the river and to be able to enjoy the naturalized stream that we have within this section too. And it's really something that kids and, you know, the public, they don't have in this section of town. And so this bringing back nature within this highly dense urbanized area is so important to be able to create that connection with the community. Next slide. And the community, they paid back too. They appreciate it. We had the neighborhood group that came in and they bought coffee and donuts for the contractors. They were so thrilled with the progress and what they were doing to the park. And then at the end, the neighborhood group pulled together and purchased lunch. So this is, again, this is a low income area. This is not a very wealthy area, and they still found it that they needed to come together and buy lunch for these contractors and say thank you. So it was really a great story. Next slide. So what's next? Just a couple slides here. We're focusing in on the watershed plan. We're focusing on the Kinnickinnic River. And so we've talked about Pulaski Park, and we're going to continue working in this area. Next slide. And this is that flood risk that's within that section. So you can see from 6th Street all the way to 43rd Street. You see the section on the river here flows from the left to the right, and you can see at the end, that's the bottom of the funnel. It can't get through that area and spills out into the neighborhood. We have over 300 structures, 300 homes and businesses that are located in the floodplain along this section of the Kinnickinnic River. And so we have a number of projects here, and we've completed Pulaski Park. We're going to be working on a larger park, Jackson Park, that is just starting with the preliminary engineering, preliminary design. That's on the far left side, and that's probably going to be up to 3 times larger than Pulaski Park. We also have a section of the river, what we call Reach 3, that we're actually working with the Army Corps of Engineers. We have a feasibility study that's been completed, and they've determined federal interest. So we're hoping to partner with them soon and start construction and design and construction of that piece. But the last project I want to focus on here, just touch on, is this section 6 to 16th. And this is the area that's has the greatest impact of this flooding. And this is where you have the flood risk spills out and inundates over 300 people. And this area has been hit by flooding multiple times in the past 10, 20 years. And it's all due to not having enough room. So this is the area that was first developed. And as the watershed was developed, the flood flows have overwhelmed this area. And so what we've determined is that even with all of this flood storage upstream, we have to expand this area. So right now we have a 50-foot concrete line cross section. We determined that we needed 200 feet in order to be able to convey the flows through this area, to safely convey the flows through this area. And in order to get that space, we had to acquire a number of properties, including 83 homes. We started this part of the project. We understood this recommendation a few years back before we even started the watershed work. And so we started that project back in 2009 and started the acquisitions. And to date, we've acquired 79 of the 83 structures that are there, all voluntary. We have removed those structures. We have 4 structures left. They're there for a variety of reasons. One is a landlord that just wants to stay there as long and make as much money for as long as he can until he has to leave. A couple other people were underwater in their mortgage, so we're just waiting out until the absolute last date, and then we'll have to ask them to move, and hopefully they'll be in a better situation and be able to keep them on their feet. But what we want to do is take this river from that concrete lining and expand it. Next slide. Expanding that concrete from the picture on the left and expand it from 50 feet to the 200 feet and put in a naturalized section similar to Pulaski. This section of the river, we're trying to show how the community can engage with the river. There's a lot of hardscape there. We're going to have more of a mix. So there'll be some more vegetated areas. But at the end of the day, we want to have that connection between the community and the river, not necessarily from the flooding perspective, but from having that connection with the natural resource in their backyard. So this is the last table that I have, and it's really just to show what we're trying to achieve here. We've completed a bunch of work. We've invested over $58 million. That's in the acquisitions and deconstruction and demolition, as well as Pulaski Park. And so we've removed a few structures. We also have concrete lining that we've removed, but only about a half a mile, and it's going into the next 5 years is when we really hope to take off with investing another $100 million, where we'll remove over 250 structures from that floodplain by reducing the flood risk, not physically removing those structures, and then also removing that concrete lining. And then 2026, we're hoping that we get it done before 2035. So the next 15 years, we want to have this project done and reduce the flood risk to these over 700 structures in total, and remove all of that concrete lining, that legacy concrete lining. But it'll come at a cost. It's a big price tag, and it's something that, for the most part, right now the investment is a local investment, but we are looking for federal partners as we move forward. So that, I think, is all we have. Hopefully you're still there, and the storms have not blown you away. I hear there's some pretty nasty weather there.
Yeah, I was hoping I wouldn't black out right here when the sirens were going off, but we managed to weather the weather. So, oh, this is great. Very interesting story and project, and large project. Just a note for our attendees: if you have a question, please feel free to find your way to the Q&A chat area, and it looks like 2 cartoon thought bubbles or talking bubbles, and one has a question mark in it, and it's probably at the top right or right hand side of your screen. Feel free to type in your questions over there, and we will get them answered by our fabulous speakers today. And while I hear them furiously typing, I'll I will. I'll kick it off with one of my own, a question of my own. So you said your table said you started in 2009. So was that just like the buyout process?
Yeah, I mean, this project has had a couple of starts and stops. So we had one section of concrete that it was only about 500 feet, and we also removed a bridge down at the far downstream end. That was back in 2010 through 2012. So we started this project. We understood that we had some significant issues, and it's complicated, but essentially we started the project, understood what we needed to do within this area, and we had that early out project that we were able to tackle. But then as we're starting to move forward, we, working with the agencies, realized that the floodplain, the flood flows that had been calculated, they had gone up to a certain period there, up to 2004. And as we were moving forward with our project, we were realizing when you incorporate rainfall data from 2004 to even 2012, the flood flows started going up significantly. And so we had to basically stop and restart, and went back to the watershed plan and really understood that, oh, we need to relook at this, because things have changed. And so it's something where we started the project with the buyouts. We knew we needed a wider corridor within that section, so we had started moving forward on that. We knew we needed a larger bridge, and we needed to remove the concrete at the downstream area. But then we had to take a step back and do the larger watershed project, and now we're ready to gear up again. And I guess just to touch on what, it's developed watershed, and so there's not a lot of room to build in a lot of freeboard. It's basically you got what you got, and so, and we maxed that out pretty much as far as what's acceptable. But our hope is, and we understand that climate change is real and that it's going to keep going. And so what we did is during the project, we performed a resiliency study to understand how, if flows go up more, is that going to change the size of what we've already built? Is that going to make what we built, significantly undersized, and we would want to go back and build it bigger? And the answer that we determined is that, we went in and based on the results of that, and we said, yes, some of these bridges are a little undersized. And so we went back and updated the recommendation and said, okay, you have to make those bigger than what we previously thought. But then after that, it's, really, if the flows go up, we got to build something new. We're not going to go and redo what we did. We just would have to build something new. And so we're waiting on that piece to see if that's going to happen. But we're also hoping that widespread green infrastructure is also going to help us build that resiliency, and hopefully we can spread that out. And that's kind of a second effort, another effort that we're doing within the watershed that we didn't really touch on today. We touched on it a little bit, but it is, we want to blanket the area with green infrastructure and to try and treat the water where it falls rather than just pushing that problem downstream. And so we're hoping that will help build, especially in these small urban watersheds, that will build us a lot of resilience.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. It's just an amazing project. It brings to mind the work that's been done in probably continuing in Dubuque on their B Branch Creek.
Yeah.
They had a similar, having to buy out a whole section, and maybe there's more going, but amazing the way it can turn out when that type of effort is put into it. And what a boon to the community. What a great asset for, green space and fishing and sitting down by the river and amphitheaters, and just really beautiful. So it looks like you're headed in that direction, and that's fantastic. Great for the citizens.
It is.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, Tanya said there aren't any fish in the Kinnickinnic River, and she's right. With the concrete there, it does impede. But we, in the downstream end, we do have salmon that come up. So salmon are in Lake Michigan, both salmon and trout. Salmon were introduced back in the 60s, coho salmon, and they're really strong swimmers. And so they can get pretty far even with that concrete. We still block them with some of our structures, and so but the hope is that we can remove that concrete and that we can allow fish passage to continue up. It's a challenge. So we don't have a lot of places for them to go right now because it's an urban watershed, but the more we can get that exposure, we can get that fish passage through this area, the better it is for the community and the more fun people can have, and I really appreciate these resources.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a couple of questions that have come in.
Sure.
First one from Anthony. Any particular methods you use to determine where to start when you begin the naturalization process? The top of the watershed, the bottom, the middle? Are there any rules or regulations on that?
That is a good question. So that is something, I think that the general rule would probably be to start at the top. You start at the top and then work your way down from there. But we also we have people that are in need, and we need to address the flooding concerns, and that's primarily what we're trying to address. And so we have started our project more at the downstream funnel, working in that downstream area, and so we do have to make some adjustments as we do that work, as we build these projects and make sure that we have good transition locations from the upstream to the downstream, and if we're leaving concrete in downstream for a downstream project we haven't started yet, we have to address that too. So there's some things you have to address there. I mean, we're also in this where we have this is an urbanized watershed. So there's something to that where it's coming. The flows are coming and they're coming fast. And, it really, you get a little bit of benefit, I think, maybe from working upstream to downstream. But it's just a flashy watershed overall. So the flows are going to come in, and there is, I'm getting slightly off topic or off the question, but it's when we build these channels, we talk about it, and we'll throw out the term, stream restoration. But what we're restoring in these areas is nothing like what was there before. The types of streams that we're putting in, we use a lot of rock. We're figuring out how to try and downsize that and still get the armoring that we need, but we have a significantly different watershed than what we dealt with, what was there pre-development. So we're not restoring it to what it was before because we didn't have as much flow coming as fast as we do now. We're looking at it more as it's more closer to a mountain stream where it's just coming off, and you have to armor it and address that flow and make sure that you build a channel that can hold up to that. And so that's where we end up having to use more rock than what we typically would. And so Yeah, sorry, Anthony, if I didn't answer your question very well, but that's that's essentially the approach that we need to take when we construct these streams, and we're getting better. So the channels that we built 20 years ago in other parts, we used more angular stone and we used larger rock. Now we're able to figure out how to not only place the rock, we use, top of the line consultants that can go in here and design these channels, that you can place the rock, you can sprinkle in the granular material and lock it in even before you have the channel come through here. And so the size of rock that we use within this section in Pulaski is much smaller than what we use downstream at 6th Street, just a mile to the south, just because of the time. We've learned so much in how to construct these streams. It's really a new thing to try and put in this type of stream channel within an urban setting. And so we're constantly learning and incorporating that into future designs.
Well, Anthony is happy with your answer, so that was good. I got another question here. Somebody's shy and they're just anonymous. So when Milwaukee was developed a couple hundred years ago, presumably there was no flooding of the 6th through 16th Street section. What year was the first flood of the area, and was it because of the upstream development or climate change?
There has been flooding. We've seen, so you're right, that there's probably less flooding back in the day. There was probably more where you'd have the water that would soak into the ground and come out through these wetland marsh areas and seep back, and you have this great base flow that comes through this area. I don't know if you could go to the map there, one of the maps real quick, Tanya, but in the far upper right-hand corner, that's where the downtown development occurred. And so if you kind of look at that and you think, picture the development really occurring from that point and then spreading out through the watershed, just starting to go out to the far south and the far west. And so over the years, that's how the development occurred. And so in that 6th to 16th section, where we're buying the homes near Pulaski Park, that's a section that developed in the 1890s, in the 1880s, and the 1890s. It was one of the earlier areas that developed. And in 1910, we have some photos showing that they had some flooding back in the day, probably because they had, my guess is that they had some of that marshy area, some of those wetlands that were upstream were starting to get filled in with either farmlands or other things. And then even more so when they got paved over and, turned into development. But you had back in the day, 1910s, you had people that were built up very close to that stream, and there were complaints. There's documents showing that there was flooding back in the day. And in the 1930s, in the late 30s, after they had armored the stream, so they had to go in, that nice picture that I showed with the 1930s channel design, that was something they did because they had to try and armor the stream. So that wasn't how it was naturally. That was something that the CCC and the WPA's, the Work Progress Administration, they came in and they put in that big rock to try and stabilize these areas, because they were starting to see erosion from these areas, the watershed changing. And so you had flooding that was taking place back in that day. You had talk in the late 30s, early 40s. They said, why don't we just put this stream in underground? Why don't we just bury it and put it in a culvert? And that, had some legs, and fortunately it got thrown out. But then after some significant flood events that hit in the late 50s in that community, in that area, that's when the concrete lining went in and was installed. And so you had the concrete that was put into place. And we've had issues over the years with flooding, and the climate change that we're seeing in the intense rain events that we're seeing in the last 20 to 30 years are definitely ramping things up, so that we are seeing higher flood events, more frequent flood events within this area. And that's what our current statistics, our current calculations show. You know, we have pretty up-to-date data. It's still going to go up. We're not blind to that. We understand that. We're trying to take measures that will address that. But our data that we have in this area, I think it extends back from 1940s. Our rainfall data that's used for modeling is from the 1940s through 2012 is what we have within the modeling.
Great. Okay. If anybody else has any questions, you better type faster. Thank you both so much for doing a presentation for us today and being part of our series. And we'd all rather have a conference and do much more networking rather than anonymously attending webinars. But we're doing what we can. So and we can't do it without great speakers and interesting subject matter like yours. So thanks to both of you and to Ed for his assistance in getting you quote unquote roped in.
No, we had a great time. Thank you for the opportunity to present this, Carol.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you both. All right. I don't see anything else coming in. And a word to our attendees, I will be getting certificates of attendance out. If you were only able to join anonymously, send me an email that you were here, and I'll get those out to everybody. So, all right, we've got 3 more sessions to go, 1 on Thursday and 2 more next week. So still time to register. Don't miss them. All right.